Formula 1 pre-season testing is done and dusted. All that's left to do now is let the racing do the talking. 3 days of testing in Bahrain really has just flown by. There's been a lot of solid running from all of the 10 teams, a lot of them running pretty much without too many problems. We've had a few mechanical issues here and there, but not too many to mention, to be honest. A lot of running and a lot of mileage for all of the teams. So really now it's that time of the year where we have to go and predict who is going to come out on top in the Drivers' and Constructors' Championship before the season starts next week with the Bahrain Grand Prix. Predictions is something that I didn't do last year, so I thought I would give it a go this year, where I'm going to predict the order of the Constructors' Championship, and I'm also going to predict the order of the Drivers' Championship. But I'm not going to do a 1 to 20 of all the drivers. For me, I'm only going to predict the top 3, because I don't want to go through the whole of the championship order for all of the drivers. I think at the end of the day, what matters to you guys watching this video is you want to know who I'm going to predict to be world champion and who I think may be within a shot of winning the World Championship in 2024. So without further ado, let's get straight into it. Let's start with the Constructors' Championship, and at number 10 I have gone with Haas, who for me, coming out of the pre-season test, are the clear tail enders going into the first race in Bahrain, simply because their main focus in this test, I think, was to get on top of the tyre degradation problems that they suffered throughout 2023. And it does seem, hearing from what the drivers have been saying about their running, both Hülkenberg and Magnussen definitely seem a lot happier with the Haas in regards to the tyre life over a race distance. But performance-wise, there isn't too much to shout about from Haas. I think mainly because they were focusing on those tyre degradation problems that they wanted to resolve from last year. But it does seem that they haven't made too many gains from 2023. So they are very much going into the first race of the season on the back foot. But I think for them, as I said, the main issue was to resolve the tyre degradation problems that they had in 2023 that really did impact their season and really cost them a chance of scoring more points, and ultimately led to them finishing bottom of the Constructors' Championship. And I don't see them being able to get off the bottom of the Constructors' Championship this year. I think they are very much going to be bottom of the pile, really are going to be playing catch up to the rest of the grid. I don't think they're going to be absolutely miles off. It is going to be difficult for Haas to score points regularly. I think we will see flashes of brilliance from them over the season, but I'm going to go with Haas to finish bottom of the Constructors' Championship in 2024. At number 9, I have gone with Sauber, or Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber, whatever you want to call them. For me, they, again, pretty much like Haas, they were pretty unspectacular over the pre-season test. Obviously, on the final day, Zhou Guanyu did a bit of a performance run on the C4 tyre. There isn't too much to get excited about. Definitely last season they were very disappointing, having come off the back of the 2022 season where they finished in P6, but it seems that the way that they tailed off in 2022, that very much carried on into 2023, and they were very unspectacular. Didn't have too many good days, too many competitive weekends. All in all, I think on average they were the slowest car in 2023, and that's something that they really do need to address going into 2024. But it does seem that it's going to be another tricky season. No doubt that the driver lineup of Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu is probably on average the weakest lineup, but nevertheless, with Bottas' experience as a Grand Prix winner, that definitely helps. I think Zhou actually is a solid driver, but as for the car, I don't see it being too much of a threat towards the front of the field. I think, like I said with Haas, there will be flashes of brilliance, no doubt. I think on some weekends we will see them fighting to maybe get into Q3 and score some solid points, but I don't think Sauber on the whole will be too much of a threat to the midfield or even the front runners. So P9 for Sauber for me in 2024. At number 8, I have gone with Williams, and for me, Williams have come off the back of this pre-season test. I think they were actually a little bit disappointed with how they performed over the 3 days in Bahrain. I think they came off the back of what was obviously a fantastic 2023 for them, finishing P7 in the Constructors' Championship, and I think without a doubt they were visualising being even more competitive this year. I think they had the aim of challenging for the likes of Alpine for 6th in the overall standings, but it seems that they've almost been caught by surprise by how much progress other teams have made and how much they've been able to develop their cars over the winter. And I think although Williams have improved like their rivals, I think they've been caught up by how much more other teams have improved. I think they have not made as much gains as their rivals. So I think they are going into this season a little bit disappointed and a little bit concerned as maybe they're not going to be as strong as they'd hoped initially. But no doubt that Alex Albon and Logan Sargent do look a lot happier than they were this time 12 months ago, and obviously Williams went into that season looking like they were the slowest of all of the teams. It's going to be maybe difficult in the first couple of races maybe to score points. We'll see. Obviously last year they managed to score points in the first race and they were a lot less competitive, as I said, going into 2023 than they are now. But overall I think Williams are going to struggle to make gains going forward. I think it's going to be a much trickier season for them, but I do see them scoring points quite regularly, and I think there will be a few Q3 appearances as well. But P8 for me for Williams in 2024. In P7 I have gone with Alpine, who for me are going into the season very much looking to be a lot more consistent and simply looking to be a lot more stable, certainly as a team behind the scenes with the management and so on, after the management exodus that we saw in the middle of 2023. But for me they weren't very spectacular. In fact, Alpine had the slowest times out of all of the teams in the test, very much focusing on the long runs and the performance over a race distance. So very much an unspectacular pre-season test for them, but I think they're very much playing the long game. I think overall they know that they're going to be a little bit on the back foot compared to the teams ahead of them. There's very much a optimism, I think, in the team that they can ultimately to try and score points pretty regularly, get a few Q3 appearances. We saw obviously last year that they got a couple of podiums, but consistency was definitely their main weakness in 2023, and that's something that they need to rectify for 2024. But they're very much going into the first race in Bahrain not in a position where they would like to be. I think, as you can see by where I placed them in the order, that they have fallen behind one of the other teams that finished behind them last year. So Alpine for me, it's going to be a much more difficult and challenging season, I think, for them to be competitive. There is certainly a chance for them to, as the season goes on, if they develop the car well, but they can fight more regularly in the midfield and challenge maybe even the front runners every now and again at some circuits going forward. So P7 for me for Alpine in 2024. In P6 I have gone with Aston Martin, which may be a bit of a controversial and surprising decision. But I think that ultimately, coming off the back of this pre-season test, I think Aston actually are a little bit disappointed with where they are. I think ultimately they did shift their focus more to looking at the long runs rather than going for a performance run on the C4 or C5 tyre. But looking at the body language of the team, look at the body language of the drivers, both Fernando Alonso and Lance Stroll, they don't have a sort of a spring in their step. They're not smiling too much. I think they know that Aston are certainly nowhere near as competitive going into this season as they were going into 2023, when it was pretty clear that Aston were right in the fight to fight for podiums and points regularly. Ultimately, I think they are coming off the back of what was a disappointing middle part of 2023, when they kind of got lost in the development of the car and went in the wrong direction. While the likes of McLaren turned their season around and overtook them, Ferrari and Mercedes got stronger, and Aston ultimately fell off the cliff, and it really cost them a chance of what should have been a solid P4. Finishing the championship ended up being P5, which still was progress from 2022, but nevertheless was probably a little bit disappointing given where they were at the start of the year. But there's definite signs that Aston obviously could be a threat at the front of the field, certainly in the midfield, and I think there will be the odd podium here and there. I think with Fernando Alonso on board once again, I think judging by the times he was posting, just looking how consistent his lap times were over a race run, there's definite signs that Aston will be there here and there. I think it will depend on the circuit, and it will ultimately depend on how they're able to upgrade the car. Have they learned the lessons from last year? I think that's going to be key to where they finish in the Constructors' Championship. But ultimately, I do think they will fall back compared to last year, so I'm going to go with Aston Martin to finish P6 in the championship this year. In P5 I have gone with RB, who of course are going to this season under a complete new rebrand, obviously reverting from the old AlphaTauri name. They're now known as Visa Cash RB F1 team in full, but obviously for short we're just going to call them RB. And from pre-season testing, they're looking pretty decent actually. I think ultimately on a couple of the days they definitely put in some solid times. No doubt that they were more focused, like other teams, on race runs rather than ultimate performance. But I think ultimately, obviously this new strategy of making the most of their partnership with Red Bull, obviously their sister team, the more senior team in the Red Bull family. They want to make the most of that relationship and take obviously more parts from the Red Bull and put it onto their own car. So the V-Carb 01 definitely looks like it could be certainly one to watch over the season. I think it really is going to be really interesting to see how RB get on over the season. I think they are going to be possibly a bit of a dark horse in 2024. It's going to be interesting how they are able to develop the car over the season. You know, what sort of parts are they going to take from the Red Bull and put onto their car? And I think ultimately, both Daniel Ricciardo and Yuki Tsunoda, I think you can sort of see they're sort of hiding a little bit, but there is a bit of excitement and a bit of a buzz in that team as to where they could finish this year. I think the talk of certainly points, I think there is definitely an outside shot of a podium at some point this year. Really depends how they execute their weekends. But RB for me are definitely going to be ones to watch in 2024. I think ultimately the way that they're going to be able to develop that car, taking more parts on the Red Bull, is going to be key to where they finish in the season. And so for that reason, I've decided to place them in P5 for 2024. In P4, I'm going to go with McLaren, who are coming off the back of a pre-season test where I think ultimately they were pretty solid. More often than not, they were right near the sharp end of the timesheets on all of the 3 days. But I don't think we have yet to see the ultimate performance of the McLaren. I think it's a bit difficult to read where they're going to be. Some, I think, are suggesting that they are in the fight for P2 in the Constructors' Championship. Some are saying they're a little bit lower. Ultimately, I think they are maybe not going to this season as strong as they would certainly like to be, and I think compared to Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, they're not quite as strong. But no doubt that the way that they were able to turn around their 2023 season, you know, they had such a miserable start to 2023 with all the problems that they had, and then just like that in Austria we saw with a huge in-season upgrade, they were just able to completely turn around their season and to go from being struggling to get out of Q1 to suddenly fighting for points and podiums on a regular basis. And had they finished the season as they started, they would have been a clear second in the Constructors' Championship. Really the main challenge for them is going to be trying to carry that momentum that they finished 2023 with and take that into this 2024 season. They're going to have a solid driver lineup, one of the strongest driver lineups on the grid in Lando Norris and Oscar Piastri. So there's a little bit of work to do at McLaren, but I think all in all they're going to have another solid season where they're going to be fighting once again for regular podiums in 2024. So P4 for me for McLaren this year. So we've made it to the top three, and in third place I'm going to go with Mercedes, who are definitely going into this season with a clear aim to get on top of all of the problems that they've had over the past 2 years, where they've only been able to win one race over the past 2 seasons. It has been certainly a difficult period for them. They really have struggled to get on top of these new regulations that came into force in 2022, and for them they've gone with a completely different car compared to the previous 2 years. They've done away with the zero side pod concept, and what's interesting is obviously for the front wing that has obviously grabbed the headlines and caused a bit of a stir in the paddock, where they've gone in a completely different direction and found a bit of a loophole in the regulations. But it does seem that despite this, even though the drivers are a lot happier, Hamilton and Russell have definitely spoke after the test that the car is way better than it was this time last year, and that they are certainly in a much better position and are looking a lot more competitive. But the problem is that other teams have made just as many gains, so it means that they're not going to be quite where they want to be going into the first race in Bahrain. But certainly the car does look a little bit easier to drive. I think we did see a few moments where the drivers were locking up and getting a bit of an understeer, and every now and again we get a bit of a snap of oversteer on the exit of a corner. So it seems that it's still every now and again a bit tricky to drive the Mercedes W15, but it does seem a lot more consistent in its behaviour. So I'm certainly expecting Hamilton and Russell to be in a stronger position compared to the last 2 years, and I think podiums, certainly a win, is going to be the main aim for Mercedes this year. They certainly need to win a race. To go throughout 2023 without winning a race, the first time Mercedes had not won a race in the V6 hybrid era. Lots of work to do for Mercedes, obviously, going into this year, but I think for 2024, I think they're going to be in the fight here and there. So I'm going to go with a P3 finish for Mercedes this year. So we've come down to the top two. It's out of Red Bull or Ferrari. Who am I going to pick to be Constructors' Champions in 2024? So for P2, I have gone with Ferrari. No surprises there. Obviously, Ferrari, coming off the back of this pre-season test, I think are very much in quite a happy position. Everyone in the team is pretty satisfied with how they performed over the test. Obviously, they grabbed the headlines for having the fastest time. They were fastest across the final 2 days, day 2 and day 3. Despite going for a bit of a performance run, I think the car actually does look solid over a race run as well, and it seems both of the drivers, both Leclerc and Sainz, are happy with the direction Ferrari has taken over the winter, and certainly feel that they're going to this season a lot more competitive than they were 12 months ago. And I think the car for this year is a lot more predictable. It's not too much of a handful for the drivers in the corners. So I think for Ferrari it's going to be interesting to see what their sort of objectives are for this season. I think in the back of their minds they would like to say they would like to go for the championship. I think ultimately that will be the main aim, but I think for them realistically it's going to be about trying to win more races this year. Obviously they were the only team other than Red Bull to win a race last year, so they would certainly like to add a couple more here and there across 2024, but certainly I think they're going to be very competitive over one lap. Once again, we saw, despite how tricky the car was to drive in 2023, that ultimately Ferrari was still the strongest car over one lap consistently, I'd say, even though Red Bull were the dominant team in 2023. But for me, Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz definitely going to this season happier than they were last year. So Ferrari for me are going to have another solid campaign and going to be Red Bull's main rivals throughout the season. So P2 finish for me for Ferrari in 2024. So that leaves my Constructors Champions for 2024 as Red Bull, which is not too much of a surprise. They have had an amazing pre-season test once again. They look clearly the firm favourites going into the first race of the season in Bahrain. And what's amazing is the fact that the car looks just as competitive as its predecessor. That was obviously the big question coming to this season. Could Red Bull somehow be able to design and develop a car that was as strong, if not stronger, than the RB19? Well, it does seem that the RB20 is as strong as its predecessor, and that is full credit to Adrian Newey. With all of his expertise, with all of his knowledge, with all of his experience, he's been able to somehow put together another solid, potentially world championship winning package. And what's interesting is obviously he's taken inspiration from last year's Mercedes, the failed Mercedes concept that Mercedes were never able to make work, and yet it seems that Adrian has been able to make it work on the Red Bull. Just goes to show just how important he is to the team. And you can see by the smiles in the team, Max seems happy with where the car is. What struck me most is how he said the car is able to do everything that he wants. I think Checo is also happy with where the car is. Maybe a bit of a concern for Red Bull is some reliability problems creeping in. We saw that Checo had a bit of a reliability problem on the second day, so maybe that's something that Red Bull have to be wary of and may have to fix. That could potentially be a bit of a hurdle that they have to overcome during the season, but I think performance-wise they are very happy with where the car is, and they are very much setting their sights on winning a third consecutive championship double. So those are my predictions for the Constructors' Championship order in 2024. But now I'm going to predict my top three for the Drivers' Championship this year. And at number 3, I have gone with Lewis Hamilton, who's come off the back of a season where I don't think he actually got a lot of credit. Certainly should have got more credit than he got for what I think was actually one of his strongest seasons throughout his Formula 1 career. Being able to finish in the top 3 in the World Championship in a car that was probably on average only the 4th quickest throughout the year. And I think Lewis, despite the fact he's approaching 40 years old, obviously we know what his future holds now. He's moving to Ferrari next year, so this year is very much the last dance, the last chance for him to end his Mercedes career on a high note, and I think that will definitely be an aim of his and be a main motivation to end this association with Mercedes that goes back to his McLaren days, to end it on a real high and go out with a bang before he moves to Ferrari next year. I think the main target for Lewis is going to be certainly to win a race. Obviously he's gone 2 seasons without winning a race, which is hugely surprising given just how successful he's been over his Formula 1 career. 7-time world champion, broken every record in the book. So that will certainly be his main aim, main target for 2024. And I think there is more than enough signs that Lewis is still a solid and complete driver. I think although he's lost a little bit of speed over one lap, I think over a race distance he is still a huge threat to the front runners, and I think you can never write him off. So for me, Lewis, I see another really strong season for him, and I'm going to go for him to finish 3rd in the World Championship in 2024. Who am I going to place as my runner-up for 2024? Well, I'm going to go with Ferrari's Charles Leclerc, who obviously finished runner-up in the championship in 2022, but slipped back down to 5th place last year after a bit of a tricky season for him. I think that Charles is still one of the top drivers on the grid. I think even though it was a bit of a tricky season for him last year, still parts of his driving, I think he's a bit of a rough diamond is the way I put it. He's clearly got the talent, he's clearly got the speed, but he's not quite as rounded as his rivals, the likes of Hamilton, the likes of Alonso, the likes of Verstappen. This is where he needs to improve. He needs to cut out these silly little mistakes that we see from him in qualifying and the races. He needs to be more consistent. I do think sometimes he does struggle with the pressure and the expectation, not necessarily of driving for Ferrari, but I think he puts a lot of pressure and expectation on his own shoulders, and that obviously leads to him making these mistakes during a race weekend. So he needs to cut those out. But I think ultimately what strikes me most about his career is the fact that he's scored 23 pole positions. He's clearly, for me, the quickest driver in Formula 1, certainly over one lap. But the fact he's still at this point in his career where he's only got 5 race wins compared to 23 pole positions simply is not good enough for a driver of his calibre. He needs to rectify that starting now. It's now or never for him, I think, to start putting together more race wins and converting more pole positions into wins. But I think, given where Ferrari are coming off the back of this pre-season test, I think there is a chance for him to win more races and convert more pole positions into race wins. So Charles Leclerc for me is going to be within the championship hunt, but will ultimately fall short, but still will finish a very solid P2 in the World Championship. So that leaves my 2024 Formula 1 World Champion as Max Verstappen. Again, not too much of a surprise, just like my prediction that Red Bull will win the Constructors' Championship, but just coming off the back of the pre-season test, Max looks extremely happy with where Red Bull are, and he's obviously clearly the man to beat after his spectacular and dominant 2023 season, where he really was so impressive. As I said last year, I think for me it was the greatest individual season by any driver in Formula 1 history, to win 19 races over a 22 race season. The fact that he could have actually won more as well really speaks volumes of where he is in his career. He's in this period where he is just so dominant and so in such a good place. He's got the best team behind him, he's driving the best car, and he is, as a driver, so rounded, such an incredible calibre of driver. He is definitely cementing himself in amongst the all-time greats with the way that he is performing. His execution from weekend to weekend really is something to behold. So for me, without a doubt, Max is going to be the driver to beat in 2024, and I don't see anybody being able to take his crown off him this year. I think he is going to be clearly once again too far ahead of the opposition for them to try and give him a run for his money for the World Championship. So Max Verstappen, I think, is going to be a 4-time world champion by the end of 2024, and that is going to be something that we will ultimately applaud if it does end up being that way, because it will mean that he becomes the 5th driver in Formula 1 history to win 4 straight world championships after Fangio, Schumacher, Vettel and Hamilton. So it looks as though once again Max will be rubber stamping his name in the history books in 2024. Well, there you go, that's my predictions for the 2024 Formula 1 season, who I think is going to come out on top in the battle for both the Constructors and Drivers World Championships. Obviously, these are just my opinions. I'm going off what I've seen from testing and how I think the season is ultimately going to shape out by the checkered flag in Abu Dhabi. But now I'd love to hear what your opinions are. They similar to mine? What are your predictions for the top 10 in the Constructors' Championships, and who do you think is going to come out on top as the Drivers' World Champion for 2024? Be sure to let me know your thoughts in the comment section, and don't forget that if you are new around here, to like the video and to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching, guys, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.